The funeral was beautiful. That was the part Adrian Ashmore remembered most. How beautiful it was. White lilies along the church steps, women dabbing their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. His father standing at the front of the congregation with the precise expression of a man performing grief rather than feeling it. The coffin was mahogany. Adrian had chosen it himself. He watched the whole thing from a hillside half a mile away, wrapped in a borrowed coat, very much alive. The duel had been arranged down to the last second. A paid surgeon to confirm death. A sealed coffin so no one would look too closely. A duelist who knew how to make a blank shot sound real. Adrian had spent 4 months planning it, which was 4 months longer than his father had spent planning his future. The forced marriage to Lady Maren Voss was supposed to happen in spring. A business arrangement dressed in lace. Adrian had met Sylvain exactly twice. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, and she looked at him like he was one more asset being added to a ledger. He did not blame her for that. He blamed his father. So he died instead. 3 years changes a man. Adrian had spent them in the north, working under a false name, learning what it meant to earn something with his hands rather than inherit it. He worked a mill for 8 months, a shipping dock for 6. He got good at being nobody. He even stopped flinching when someone called him Mr. Cole. Creditors had already sent 2 men to assess the property. The title had gone into legal limbo with no clear heir. Distant cousins were circling. Ashmore Estate, 400 acres of the finest land in the county, was quietly falling apart. He could not let that happen. He could not resurface either. So he did the only thing that made sense. He applied for the position of estate steward under the name Mr. Cole. His own reference letters, forged with some help, described a man of moderate experience and reliable character. He was hired within a fortnight. What the letter of acceptance did not mention was that he would not be reporting to a solicitor, or a distant cousin, or any of the men he had expected. He would be reporting to a woman named Maren Voss. She was in the eastern field when he arrived. Adrian had imagined many versions of what he would find at Ashmore. Broken fences, windows gone gray. The slow collapse of a place nobody was watching. What he found instead was 3 farmhands knee-deep in a drainage channel, working fast. A boy running seed records, nobody standing still. The woman directing all of it stood at the edge of the field with mud on her boots and a coat she had patched at least twice at the elbows. She looked up when she heard his horse. She looked at him the way you look at a tool you are not sure is the right size for the job. Mr. Cole, she said. Not a question. Miss Voss, he said, and immediately regretted it when her eyes sharpened. You know my name. Your letter of hire mentioned it. She considered this for a moment, then handed the seed records back to the boy without looking at him. You're 2 hours late. I expected you before noon. The road from Tiverton was washed out. I came the long way. There is no long way from Tiverton that takes 2 extra hours, unless you stopped somewhere. He had stopped. At the hill where he watched his own funeral. He had not planned to. His horse had simply slowed and he had let it. I stopped to eat, he said. She looked at him one moment longer, not convinced, but with other things to deal with. Come then, I'll show you the accounts. The accounts were immaculate. That was the second thing that surprised him. Adrian had expected disaster, and found instead a set of records so clean and detailed they would have shamed the solicitors his father employed. Every expenditure justified, every yield tracked across 3 seasons. Maren Voss had been running Ashmore on almost nothing, and keeping it from collapse through stubbornness, and probably very little sleep. He sat across from her in the small estate office and turned pages while she watched him with her arms folded. You're surprised, she said. I'm impressed. Those are different things, he looked up. Yes, they are, and I meant the second one. Something shifted briefly in her expression. Not softness exactly. More like she had expected a different kind of man and was adjusting. The Northfield needs attention before winter. The Greystone tenants are 3 months behind on rent, but their oldest son broke his leg in August, and they have no hired help. I've deferred them until spring. If you have objections, say them now. No objection. The dairy roof needs replacing. I've had a quote from a builder in the village. It's fair. I'll need your approval as steward to release the funds. Approved. She blinked. You haven't seen the quote. You said it was fair. I believe you. Something in her posture eased, barely. She pulled the quote from a folder and slid it across the desk anyway. Read it. I don't want approvals from men who aren't paying attention. He read it. It was fair. He said so again and she made a note without comment. They worked through the rest of the accounts without stopping. She was precise, unsentimental. She interrupted him twice when he read something wrong and did not apologize for it. He found, somewhere in the 3rd hour, that he was not pretending to pay attention anymore. It was nearly dark when he left the office. He walked through the main hall on his way to the steward's quarters, and stopped at the foot of the stairs. The portrait still hung where it always had. Adrian Ashmore, 2nd Duke of Ashmore, painted at 22 in the formal style his father preferred. The artist had made him look more serious than he ever actually was. Someone had written across the bottom of the frame in chalk, "Useless." He stood there for a long moment looking at his own face. Then he went upstairs, lay down on the narrow steward's bed, and stared at the ceiling of the house he had grown up in the room a duke's son would never have noticed existed. He was home. That was the problem. Someone already knows he's alive. Maren had a system for new stewards. She gave them 3 days before she formed an opinion. Most men arrived with ideas about how things should run and spent those 3 days explaining those ideas to her while she smiled and waited for them to finish. Then she showed them the actual numbers and watched their faces change. Mr. Cole did not do that. He arrived on day 1, read every ledger without comment, approved the dairy roof without arguing, and spent the following morning walking the north field alone before she was even out of the house. She watched him from the upper window. He moved like someone who already knew the land, which made no sense for a man from Tiverton. She filed that away and said nothing. The Greystone situation came to a head on the 4th day. Thomas Greystone arrived at the estate gate at 7 in the morning with his hat in his hands and the posture of a man who had rehearsed his words on the walk over. Maren was already at the gate before he finished knocking. "Miss Voss," his voice was rough. "I heard there's a new steward. I came to explain about the rent. I know about your son's leg, Thomas. I deferred you until spring. That hasn't changed." He blinked. "The letter I received said." "What letter?" He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Maren read it in 10 seconds flat. It was formal, stiff, and informed Thomas Greystone that his outstanding rent was to be settled by month's end, or the matter would be referred to the estate's solicitors. It was signed Mr. Cole. She thanked Thomas, sent him home, and walked back to the estate office with the letter in her hand and her jaw set. Mr. Cole was at the desk reviewing fence repair estimates. He looked up when she came in and read her face before she said a word. "The Greystone letter," he said. "You had no authority to send this without consulting me." "I had full authority. I'm the steward." "You are the steward of accounts and logistics. The tenant relationships are mine. I built them over 4 years while this estate had no steward at all, and I will not have them dismantled in a week by a man who doesn't know these people." He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of a man gathering arguments. "Something else." "You're right," he said. She had prepared for a fight. The absence of one threw her slightly. "I want that letter recalled. I already sent a second letter this morning. Thomas Greystone's deferral stands until spring." He paused. "I should have asked you first. I won't do it again." Maren stood in the doorway holding a letter that was already handled, with an argument that had nowhere to land. She put the letter on the desk and left without another word. 3 days of proper rain. The roads turned to mud. Everyone who could stay inside did. Maren was not one of those people. She had a drainage problem in the south field that would not wait for good weather, and she dealt with it in her old coat with her boots sinking into the ground, and her patience intact because this was the work, and she had always understood that. She was coming back through the orchard on the second evening when she saw him. Mr. Cole was standing at the far edge of the grounds near the old family plot. Not sheltering, not moving, just standing in the rain with his coat dark from it and his head down, looking at one of the graves. She stopped. His shoulders were set wrong, too tight for a man just standing still. His hand came up once toward the headstone and dropped. She recognized what she was looking at. She backed away before he could turn around. She told herself it meant nothing. Estate stewards had histories. Everyone had histories. A man could stand in a graveyard in the rain for any number of reasons and none of them were her business. She believed this completely and did not sleep well for 2 nights. What she knew about herself was this. She had come to Ashmore at 19 when her father took the position of estate manager. She had learned everything from him, not because anyone planned it but because she was always present, and her father found it easier to answer her questions than to stop her asking. When he died she was 21, and the estate had no manager, and she stepped into the gap without asking permission, because there was no one to ask. The first month she signed her name to documents as acting manager, and waited for someone to object. No one did. 3 years of that. 3 years of holding something together that was not hers, and would never be hers, no matter how well she ran it. She had a sister somewhere in London. Maren did not allow herself to think about why they did not speak. Wanting things was something she had learned to do quietly, where it did not get in the way. On the 5th day the rain stopped. Mr. Cole found her in the kitchen garden at dawn, which was where she went when she needed to think. She was not doing anything in particular, just standing with her hands in the dirt, and her mind running through the spring planting schedule, and the roof repair timeline, and the specific problem of the Northfield drainage which was better but not fixed. He came around the garden wall, and stopped when he saw her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Early," he said finally. "I'm always up at this hour." "So am I." He looked at the garden. This wasn't in the estate records. I planted it 2 years ago. The kitchen was spending too much on herbs and root vegetables. She pulled a weed without looking at him. It's not in the records because no one asked me to document it. He crouched down and looked at the rows with the same focused attention he gave the ledgers. How much did you save? She told him. He did the math quickly in his head and something shifted in his expression, not quite admiration, something more specific than that. You've been running this estate on instinct and goodwill, he said. And mathematics. And mathematics. He stood up. What would you do differently if the estate had real capital behind it? No one had ever asked her that before. She looked at him for a long moment. He was watching her with attention that had nothing behind it. That was the unsettling part. That's not a useful question, she said. The estate doesn't have real capital. Humor me, she told him. She told him about the watermill that could be restored and would service 3 surrounding farms. The eastern grazing land sitting idle. The tenant cottages that needed work but would hold reliable families for decades if repaired properly. She talked for longer than she intended, and when she stopped she felt exposed, and wasn't sure what to do with that. I should get back, she said. Maren. She turned. He had not used her given name before. Neither of them acknowledged that he just had. The estate is going to be all right, he said. I think you already know that. I think you've known it for a while and you've just been too tired to let yourself believe it. She did not know what to do with that, so she did what she always did. She went back to work. But she thought about it all day. And the day after. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It was addressed to the Duke of Ashmore in handwriting Maren did not recognize, on paper expensive enough that it had clearly come from London. She brought it to the office as she did all estate correspondence. When Mr. Cole saw it, something left his face entirely. I'll handle this, he said. Estate correspondence goes through me first. Not this one. She put it on the desk in front of him and left. But she stood in the hallway for 3 seconds longer than she needed to, and what she heard was the sound of a letter being opened very carefully by a man who already knew what was inside. The letter was from Sylvain. Adrian knew the handwriting before he broke the seal. He had seen it once, years ago, on a note she sent ahead of their second meeting. Precise, narrow letters that leaned slightly forward. He read it standing at the estate office desk with the door closed. She was coming to Ashmore. 2 weeks. She had things to discuss regarding the estate's outstanding debts, which she described with the measured language of someone who had spent years learning how to say threatening things politely. She did not mention knowing he was alive. She did not need to. The letter was addressed to the Duke of Ashmore, and the Duke of Ashmore was dead. She knew. He folded the letter and put it in his coat pocket and sat down and thought about what it meant that someone had spent 3 years quietly buying up a dead man's debt. The answer was not a grieving fiancé. He almost told Maren that evening. They were walking the fence line on the north field, which had become a habit neither of them had agreed to. She had a list of repairs in her hand and he was listening, and somewhere in the middle of her explaining the problem with the third post he stopped walking. She noticed before he said anything. What? There's something I should tell you. She waited. She was good at waiting, he had learned that. She did not fill silence with noise. The estate, he said. There are debts I haven't disclosed in the accounts yet. London debts. Someone has been buying them. She was quiet for a moment. How bad? Bad enough that if they called them in tomorrow, the estate would be forfeit. She looked at the fence line. At the fields beyond it, at 3 years of her work sitting in the afternoon light. Who holds them? She said. He almost said the name. I'm working on finding out. It was the first deliberate lie he had told her. It sat badly. He could feel it the whole walk back. He told himself that every morning when he heard her in the kitchen before dawn, and made himself stay in the steward's quarters for another 10 minutes before going down. It didn't help when she corrected his estimates without looking up, and was always right. It didn't help on the 5th day either, when she showed him something he had not known about his own estate. There was an old mill on the eastern boundary, not the one in her capital plan, a smaller one, stone, half collapsed, hidden behind 20 years of overgrowth. She had found it 2 winters ago when she was checking the boundary markers. I don't know why it was abandoned, she said. The water flow is still good. Someone made a decision to stop using it and didn't record why. He knew why. His grandfather had built it for a woman who was not his grandmother, and when she died he couldn't look at it anymore. It was not in any estate record because his grandfather had ordered it removed from the records. He did not know how to explain that he knew this without explaining everything else. It could be restored, he said instead. The stonework looks sound. I know. I've been trying to find the capital for 2 years. She ran her hand along the old wall. This estate has more in it than anyone ever bothered to look for. He watched her say that and did not know what to do with it. He wanted to stay. Not as a steward, not as Mr. Cole. He wanted to stay as the man who knew why the mill was abandoned and could finally tell someone, and he wanted that someone to be her. That was when he understood how much trouble he was in. On the 9th day a second letter arrived. This one was not from Sylvain. It was from the man Adrian had paid to monitor the legal situation around the title. Short, written in the careful language of someone who understood that letters could be intercepted. The matter has attracted attention from above. The original arrangement may not have been as clean as believed. Recommend urgency. Adrian read it 3 times. The original arrangement, the staged duel, his father had arranged it, down to the paid surgeon and the sealed coffin. But his father had also, according to this letter, done something else. Something the man he had paid to watch could not put plainly in writing. A staged duel required a duelist willing to fire a blank. His father had hired that man. His father had also, Adrian now understood, paid that same man a second sum. A larger one. Paid after the duel, not before. Adrian stood up, sat back down. There was nowhere to go with this. He stayed in the dark of the steward's quarters for a long time after that. He did not light a candle. He had not survived because his plan worked. He had survived because something went wrong with his father's plan. The harvest celebration was Maren's idea. She organized it the way she organized everything, without announcing it until it was already half done. Tables outside the main barn, tenants from 4 farms, bread and cider and a fiddle player from the village who knew 12 songs and played all of them twice. Adrian stood at the edge of it and watched her move through the crowd. She knew every name, every child. She crouched down to speak to Thomas Greystone's son, the one with the broken leg, now mending, and whatever she said made the boy laugh. She found him at the edge of the crowd an hour in. "You're not dancing," she said. "Neither are you. I've been working." "So have I, watching." She looked at him sideways. "That's not the same thing." The fiddle started something slower. Around them people were pairing off and he held out his hand before he made the decision to do it. She looked at his hand for 1 moment. Then she took it. They danced once. Just the one. Neither of them spoke during it, and neither of them pretended afterward that it had meant nothing, but neither of them said what it meant either. They simply stepped back from each other when the music stopped and went back to opposite sides of the evening. But he felt her eyes on him twice before the night ended. And he did not look away when he felt them. On the 13th day Maren found the intercepted letter. Not the one from Sylvain, the one from his contact. She had been reorganizing the correspondence files, which was her system and her right, and it had slipped between 2 estate folders. She brought it to him in the office and set it on the desk. "This came with the estate post," she said. "I didn't read it." He looked at the letter, then at her. "But you saw the seal," he said. She had. He could tell by the way she was standing. The seal on that letter bore a legal insignia she would recognize. It was the same insignia used on all correspondence related to the Duke of Ashmore's estate title. "Estate correspondence goes through me first," she said quietly. She was using his own words from the Greystone argument and she knew it, and so did he. He picked up the letter and said nothing. She left without pushing, but she stopped in the doorway. "Mr. Cole," she said, "whatever is coming, I would rather know." He did not answer. She left. He sat alone in the office of his own estate, in the chair that had been his father's, holding a letter that told him his father had tried to have him killed, and thought about a woman who had just told him she would rather know the truth. He had 13 days left before Sylvain arrived. He used none of them to tell her. The door opens. Maren Voss arrived on a Tuesday. She came in a hired coach, which told Adrian 2 things. She had money now, enough for London rates on a long journey. And she had come alone, which meant she did not want witnesses for whatever she was planning to do first. He watched her from the upper window the way Maren had watched him on his first morning. The comparison was not lost on him. She stepped down from the coach and looked at the estate like she was already deciding what it was worth. Then she looked up at the house and he stepped back from the window before she could see him. He had 40 seconds, maybe less, before she walked through that door and everything changed. He used them to go downstairs and stand in the hall and wait. Maren reached the door first. He heard them before he saw them. Maren's voice, even and professional. Then another voice, lighter, deliberate, every word placed. They came through into the hall together, and Adrian watched Maren's face for the moment she introduced them. "This is Mr. Cole, our estate steward," Maren said. "Mr. Cole, Lady Maren Voss. She has come regarding the estate debts." Sylvain looked at him. The recognition was immediate. He saw it move across her face and disappear in under a second, replaced by something smooth and unreadable. She had practiced that, he understood. She had known she would need it. "Mr. Cole," she said. "What an unusual name for a steward." "It does the job," he said. She smiled. Nothing else moved. She asked to see the accounts that afternoon. Maren laid them out in the estate office with her usual precision, and Sylvain sat across from her and asked questions that were intelligent and specific, the questions of someone who already knew the answers, and was checking whether she was being lied to. Adrian stood near the window and said very little. At one point Sylvain asked about the outstanding London debts. Maren explained what she knew, which was not everything, and looked briefly at Adrian when she said so. He looked back at her and said nothing and watched her face go careful. When the accounts review was done, Maren excused herself to supervise the evening work. The door had barely shut before Sylvain spoke. "You look well," she said. "For a dead man." "You look unsurprised," he said. "For a grieving fiancé." She stood and moved to the window he had just vacated and looked out at the grounds. "I knew within 6 months. The surgeon you paid talked to the wrong person and that person talked to me." She paused. "I didn't tell anyone. Why? Because your father came to see me 3 weeks after the funeral." She turned. "He wanted to know if I had any information about your whereabouts." He was not asking out of grief. "He knew the duel was staged," Adrian said. "He arranged it. What he didn't arrange was you walking away from it." She looked at him steadily. "The man he hired was supposed to make sure you didn't. Something went wrong on his end. I don't know what. But I spent the following year finding out everything I could about what your father did with that money, and then I spent the year after that making sure I had enough of it to matter." Adrian sat down. "You bought the debts to protect the estate," he said slowly. "I bought the debts because a dead man's estate with no clear heir was about to be picked apart by people who would have sold the land in pieces and turned out every tenant on it." She said it without heat, like she was reporting a fact. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because it needed doing and no one else was." He looked at her. This was not the woman he had met twice before his staged death. That woman had been polished and remote and entirely unreadable. This one was still polished, still remote. But she had spent 3 years doing something that cost her real money and real effort for an estate that was not hers and a man she had no reason to protect. "What do you want?" he said. She sat back down. "I want you to resurface, reclaim the title, clear the estate of debt using the information I have on your father's dealings, which is enough to make several powerful people very uncomfortable." She folded her hands on the desk. "And I want you to do it before someone else figures out you're alive and does it for you on their own terms. And in return? In return I want nothing." She paused. "Except an answer to one question." He waited. "The woman," Sylvain said. "Maren. She runs this estate." "Yes. She has your father's account records in the correspondence files. I saw the folder when she laid out the accounts. She doesn't know what they are." Adrian went still. "There are letters in that folder," Sylvain said carefully, "that describe the second payment to the duelist. In your father's own hand. She has been filing them for 2 years as routine estate correspondence." She looked at him. "She is going to find out everything whether you tell her or not. The only question is whether she finds out from you." He found Maren in the records room that evening. She was exactly where Sylvain said she would be, sitting at the small table with the correspondence files open in front of her, and a letter in her hand, and a look on her face that told him she had already read enough to understand something was wrong. She looked up when he came in. "Close the door," she said. He did. She set the letter on the table between them. It was his father's handwriting. He recognized it without picking it up. "Who are you?" she said. Not a question. The same tone she had used on his first morning. Not a question then either. He sat down across from her, and he told her. Not everything at once. He told it the way it actually happened, which was not clean or dramatic but slow and complicated and full of the specific details that made it real. The funeral on the hill, the mill in the north. His grandfather's name carved into the foundation stone that she had run her hand across, and he had not been able to explain. The portrait in the hall, the chalk. She listened without interrupting. That was the worst part. He had expected anger, or tears, or the door. Instead she sat across from him in the records room with her hands flat on the table and listened to every word with the focused attention she gave to ledgers. When he finished she was quiet for a long time. "The portrait," she said finally. "Yes. I wrote that." She looked at the letter on the table. "I wrote it 3 weeks after I arrived. I was angry at a man I had never met for leaving an estate in the state it was in." "I know. You stood there and looked at your own face and said nothing." "I know." She stood up. She picked up the letter and put it back in the folder and closed the folder and set it aside with the same methodical care she brought to everything. "I need to think," she said. "Maren, I need to think." She looked at him once. Direct, clear, no performance in it. "Don't follow me." She left. He sat alone in the records room with his father's letter on the table, and the folder closed and the door open. The silence of a house that was his, the feeling of having lost something that never officially was. Maren did not come to breakfast the next morning. Adrian sat at the kitchen table with a cup he did not drink from and listened to the house. He knew her routines well enough now to track her absence by sound. No movement before dawn in the kitchen garden, no boots on the back step at 6, no scratch of her pen in the records room where she reviewed the daily work orders before anyone else was up. She was somewhere in the house, he could feel it. He just could not find her. Sylvain came down at 8, dressed for travel, and read the room in under a second. "She knows," Sylvain said. She found the letters last night. Sylvain poured herself tea and sat down without being invited, which was something she did in every room she entered. How much did you tell her? Everything. A pause. How did she take it? She put the folder away and asked me not to follow her. Sylvain looked at her cup. That's Maren, she has always done that. Put things away before she lets herself feel them. Adrian looked up. You know her. She is my sister. Sylvain said it the way you say something you have not said out loud in a long time. Carefully, like the word might have changed shape while you weren't using it. We have not spoken in 4 years. She doesn't know I'm here as anything other than a creditor. The kitchen was very quiet. You came here for her, Adrian said. I came here for the estate. Sylvain stood and picked up her cup. But yes, I came to see if she was all right. She moved toward the door and stopped without turning. Tell her, before she decides to leave. Once Maren closes a door she doesn't reopen it. He found her in the old mill. He did not plan to look there. He had checked the kitchen garden, the north field, the records room. He was crossing the eastern boundary when he saw the overgrowth had been pushed back from the entrance, recent, the broken stems still green. She was sitting on the old stone foundation with her coat pulled around her, and her eyes on the water running below. She did not look up when he came in, but she did not tell him to leave either. He sat down on the foundation a careful distance from her and said nothing. The water moved. A bird crossed the gap in the roof. Outside the wind was picking up. I keep thinking about the chalk, she said finally. Maren. I wrote it the 3rd week. I was so angry. This estate. These people. 4 years of holding it together. And the man whose name was on everything had just walked away from it. She looked at the water, and then you stood there looking at your own face, and I thought you were embarrassed about the state of the portrait frame. I was, he said. Also the other thing. She almost smiled. It didn't last. You knew who I was when I handed you the accounts, she said. Yes. You let me show you everything. Every plan I had. The mill, the cottages, the water table on the east field. You sat there and listened and you already knew. I didn't know any of it. I knew the land. I didn't know what you had done with it. She was quiet for a moment. That's not the point, I know. The point is you made a decision to lie to me, and you kept making it every day and I trusted you. Her voice was even. That was worse than anger. I don't trust people easily, you know that. You watched me long enough to know exactly how rarely I do it. He had no answer for that because it was true. I'm not asking you to forgive it, he said. I'm asking you to let me tell you what I should have told you 2 weeks ago. She looked at him for the first time since he sat down. He told her about his father. Not the version he had told in the records room, which was facts and sequence. This was the other version. What it felt like to stand on a hill and watch your own funeral, and feel relief and guilt in equal measure. What it felt like to spend 3 years being no one, and then come home and find someone had done the thing you were supposed to do and done it better. What it felt like to read a letter in the dark and understand that your father had not let you go. He had tried to finish what the duel had started. She listened to all of it. When he finished she did not speak for a long time. Sylvain knew, she said. Yes. She came here knowing. She came here to make sure you were all right. Her words. Something crossed Maren's face that he could not name. Not surprise exactly. More like something she had been carrying a long time had just shifted weight. She bought the debts, Maren said. Yes. She has been holding this estate together from London for 3 years. Yes. While I was holding it together from here. Yes. She stood up. She walked to the gap where the mill door used to be and looked out at the eastern field, her field, the one she had mapped and planned and fought for. I'm going to need to think about a great many things, she said. I know. I'm not. She stopped, started again. I don't know what I feel about you right now. I know what I felt, before last night. I know that was real, but I can't. She stopped again. You don't have to know right now, he said. She turned. I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly. Yes. If Sylvain had not come, if those letters had stayed in the folder another year, would you have told me? He sat with that question. I don't know, he said. I want to say yes, I believe I would have, but I had 13 days and I didn't use any of them, and I don't know how to make that into a yes with any honesty. She nodded once, like that was the answer she had expected and had needed to hear him say. I'm going to go back to the house, she said. I have work to do. Maren, she stopped. The name is Adrian, he said. Adrian Ashmore. I should have told you that the first morning. She looked at him standing in the old mill his grandfather built for a woman he loved and could not keep. She looked at him for long enough that he felt it. Then she walked out into the eastern field, and back toward the house without answering. She came to his room that night. He was still dressed, sitting at the small desk in the steward's quarters with nothing in front of him, when he heard the knock. One knock. Not tentative, deliberate. He opened the door. She had her coat on still, like she had decided to come and not given herself time to reconsider. Her face was not soft and it was not hard. It was just hers, which he had learned over weeks was the most she ever gave anyone. "I'm not here because I've forgiven you," she said. "I know. I'm here because tomorrow you are going to start the process of becoming the Duke of Ashmore again, and after that everything changes and I needed to." She stopped. "I needed to say something to the man I thought you were before he becomes someone else entirely." He stepped back from the door. She came in. She did not stay long. That was not what it was. It was not comfort, and it was not a beginning, and it was not quite a goodbye. It was something Maren Voss allowed herself the way she allowed herself most things, quietly, without making it mean more than she could afford. When she left, she paused in the doorway. "The man I thought you were," she said. "He wasn't wrong, he was just incomplete." She closed the door. He stood in the steward's quarters of his own estate, and felt the particular weight of being known by someone who had every reason not to. The solicitors arrived on a Wednesday. 3 of them, from London, with documents that required Adrian's signature in 11 places, and his presence at a formal hearing in the city within the fortnight. They sat in the estate office where Maren had laid out her accounts on his first afternoon, and spread papers across the same desk, and explained in careful language what it meant to reclaim a title that had been legally dormant for 3 years. Adrian signed where they told him to sign, and answered what they asked, and when they left he sat in the office alone. The title was his again. The estate was clear. Sylvain had handed over every document she had gathered on his father's dealings. And those documents had been enough to make 3 powerful men decide very quickly that they had no interest in contesting anything. It had taken less than a week. He had expected it to feel like something larger. It felt like paperwork. Maren had not left. He had expected her to. She had the right to. The estate was no longer in danger, and her position as acting manager had always been unofficial, and she owed nothing to a duke she had known for 6 weeks under a false name. She stayed because the Northfield drainage was still not fully resolved, and the dairy roof repair was only half complete, and there were 6 things on her work list that she was not going to leave unfinished. He knew this because he still heard her boots on the back step at 6 every morning, and her pen in the records room before that. They had not spoken directly since the night she came to his room. They had been in the same spaces, passed each other in the hall, sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table when Mrs. Holt, the housekeeper, insisted on a proper breakfast now that there was a duke in residence again. They were civil in the way that people are civil when they are carrying something they have not yet decided what to do with. Sylvain was still at the estate. That surprised him. She had said she was leaving and she had not left, and he did not ask why because he thought he understood. He came into the parlor one evening and found them there together, Maren and Sylvain, sitting on opposite ends of the same settee with a pot of tea between them that neither of them appeared to be drinking. They were not talking when he came in, they were just sitting, which, he understood from everything he knew about Maren, was more than talking. He backed out of the doorway before either of them saw him. The portrait was still in the hall. He noticed it every time he passed through, which was often now that the solicitors and the estate correspondence and the London connections that came with the title required him to move through the front of the house rather than the back. His own face looked down at him in the formal style his father had preferred, more serious than he ever actually was. The chalk was gone. He did not know when it had been wiped clean. He did not know who had done it. He stood in the hall on the 9th morning and looked at the empty space below his painted face, and thought about a woman who had been angry at a man she had never met, and had written her anger in chalk because that was the only place she had to put it. He went to find her. She was at the old mill. He had not planned to look there first. He went there by instinct and found her standing at the entrance with a builder from the village, both of them deep in the stonework, pointing at load points and mortar lines with the shorthand of people mid-decision. He waited until the builder left. She turned and saw him and waited. He had thought about what he wanted to say for 9 days. He had composed it in his head in the solicitor's office, and in the estate hall, and in the steward's quarters he still had not moved out of, despite the fact that there was a duke's chamber at the other end of the house that was technically his. He had none of it now. "I funded the mill," he said. She looked at him. "The restoration. Full capital. The builder has the commission. It should be operational by spring." He paused. "The eastern grazing land is being put back into use next season. The tenant cottages are scheduled for repair starting in March. Your plan, all of it." "Adrian, I'm not finished." He had not used his own name out loud very often in 3 years. It still felt like putting on a coat that almost fit. "The estate has a steward position, formally, with a salary and a proper contract, and a title that is not acting manager on documents no one authorized." He looked at her. "I want you to have it. Not because I need someone to run the estate. Because you have been running it, and you should be paid for what you actually do." She was quiet. "That's not why you came down here," she said. "No." "Then say the other thing." He had walked down to the mill in the boots he had worn since his first morning. The ones Maren had looked at on his first day, and said nothing about but which she knew, he understood now, meant he had come the long way from wherever he started. They were muddy from the eastern field path. He had not taken the carriage. He had come as the man she knew, Not the Duke, she didn't. I want to know if you want your steward back, he said. She looked at him standing in the mud outside his grandfather's mill with no carriage and no title in his voice, and nothing formal to offer. The estate doesn't need a steward, she said. Something dropped. It has one, she said. It's me. It's been me for 4 years and a formal contract doesn't change that. She looked at the mill, the water moving below, the stones her hands had traced in the dark on a winter morning. I'm asking what you're actually asking. He had 13 days once and had not used them. He was not going to do that again. I'm asking if the man you came to say goodbye to is someone you want to keep, he said. Not the Duke, not Mr. Cole, the one in between who knew why the mill was abandoned and couldn't tell you and wanted to every single day. She looked at him long enough that he felt it. He's the only one I ever knew, she said. The other two I just met. He crossed the distance between them, and she did not step back. The mill opened in April. Maren ran it the way she ran everything, without announcing it until it was already half done. 3 surrounding farms contracted within the first month. The eastern grazing land turned a profit by summer. The tenant cottages were repaired and filled with families who stayed. The formal contract for the estate manager position was signed in March. The title on the document read, Maren Ashmore, which was Maren's doing, and the solicitor's mild confusion, and Adrian's complete inability to stop smiling for the remainder of that afternoon. Sylvain came to the wedding. She sat in the front row next to Thomas Greystone's son, whose leg had healed clean, and she did not cry but she held her handkerchief the entire time, which amounted to the same thing. The portrait stayed in the hall. Adrian had offered to take it down and Maren had said no. It stays, she said. So you remember what it felt like to have someone write on your face. He left it up. The chalk did not come back. But sometimes, passing through the hall in the early morning before anyone else was up, Maren would stop below the portrait and look at the man in it, younger than the one she had married, more serious than he ever actually was. She never told him what she thought about in those moments. He never asked. Some things a person is allowed to keep.
Subscribe to Duke Stories by Chris for more stories that will keep you up past your bedtime.